guest, Bruce Rodda. He is now Manager of Investment Attraction and International Development for the City of Mount Gambier. Bruce has a long history of working with the export industry. Some say he has been specialising in red wine, but I'll leave that up to him. He's proficient in advising and delivering services on export-related matters, leading trade missions and developing export potential in Australian companies. During the past 16 years, he has led 15 trade missions to international markets, including China, Singapore, Chicago and Japan, and he has assisted with developing friendship city cooperation with 2 Chinese cities and the city of Mount Gambier. Bruce was a business ambassador for South Australia and a Justice of Peace. So here is Bruce.
Well, thank you, John. And in thanking John, I sincerely thank Sinclair Wilson for hosting this roadshow. I know I'm showing my age when I say this, but I've participated in a number of roadshows. Anyone from the ANZ Bank here? I know NAB's here, but anyway, ANZ ran a couple of very good roadshows when the China market was starting to, initially evolve, and we did a couple with riding the back of the tiger, etc. But what I like about Sinclair Wilson's efforts here is that it's expanded over the Green Triangle region, where I did a lot of work once, and I used to service the Hamilton, Portland, a little bit of Warrnambool, and just found that by just forgetting about the border and just working with people and companies and knowing that rather than us looking north to Adelaide and the guys over the border looking towards Melbourne, that collectively we got a lot more done. And so I think that we've, with hand on heart and a new government in the state, that will get us back on track where we believe that businesses create jobs and not bloated public service, then we will once again be able to look to Adelaide for some assistance. But I think it's important that, and following on from David's remarks, that we continue to grow that Green Triangle nexus, if you like, that we can support one another. And the agencies that are actually working under your umbrella with this roadshow, as you go around, will acknowledge that, and we look forward to growing that. And I noticed that even councils now are spending a lot more time with some co-work on respective industry. I know tourism is Glenelg and both Southern Grampian Shire are doing a lot of work together. So I'd just like to make mention of that. Commend you for this event, and happy to be here. Just while I'm on the Green Triangle, of interest to me in a paper last week that I picked up was I think 18 companies from around the Green Triangle and more on the Great Ocean Road recently had some time in Shanghai with Brett Moore, who's the Commissioner in Shanghai, and with Austrade. And I think out of that article, it sort of resonates with me, and it's probably some of the things I'm going to mention here tonight, is that the one thing that Brent did say to them, because this was really a market awareness mission, he said, go home and think seriously about what size city you are wanting to coordinate or cooperate with in China. He said, my suggestion is go home and start looking at some 4th or 5th tier cities. And I think that's very sound advice to give a delegation on their first trip to China, because I wish that somebody had given us that advice when we first went to China. Now, getting on to the nub of my address, and as John's introduced my background, and presently I do assist the City of Mount Gambier with a couple of specific projects, and that's their international engagement and also the investment attraction. My background, as John said, fits me into that pretty nicely. And but there's always plenty of shocks when you start taking your feet off the terra firma in Australia and start heading off into Asia. So the City of Mount Gambier really has been active in the China engagement strategy since 2014, because they made the decision within council to listen to what their local government authority, the LGA in South Australia, was their strategy, and so they combined them, and more importantly, they shaped it to suit the local scene. Their first trip away, I think, was about 2015, and that was to accompany the South Australian government on their Shandong sister city relationship. And that's a long-standing, and 15 and 16 was the 30th year anniversary of that relationship, sister city relationship with the province of Shandong. And I went on the 14, the 15 and the 16. 2016 was this council, I think another 3 councils in the Limestone Coast region. We also took some companies with us, but unfortunately there was 300 other South Australian companies with us on this mission. Now I can tell you it's pretty hard to get up the front of the line and start trying to express to somebody your point of difference when you've nearly forgotten about what your elevator pitch is, 2 days ago. So we came back, we supported the state, and this is at council level. They made the decision that this wasn't really for them. I think what really drove home to us that we found that we'd split off and gone into some smaller cities, and with Salisbury and Tea Tree Gully and some of these other councils in the city had quite strong relationships with these smaller cities already in place. So they were actually having 3, 4, 5 missions a year that they were doing some quite good work. But having said that, what they did have is they had a need in China, and these cities in South Australia were able to satisfy it. Water issues, waste issues, a lot of service issues. And so therefore they were doing their work. So what had really happened was that they'd built the bridge and people were going off, especially councils were going off and making their own way. So what we did here is that it was the time that we decided that, yes, it was going to be focus on a smaller cities. And through all sorts of reasons, the mayor had some influence because we'd had visits from previous mayors from provinces. So we engaged a company, an agribusiness company in Beijing, Asian Agribusiness Consulting, run by Michael Boddington, who was the Ducks of Roseworthy in Adelaide. He runs a very successful business in Beijing. I've known Michael for many, many years. He's got 22 girls on his staff. You don't get a job with Michael if you haven't got a master's and in agriculture. So we gave him the job to look at the 2 cities we'd selected, and that was Luan in the south and Baotao in Inner Mongolia. And he actually went to those cities and presented us with a report, and we had at least something we could work on. We had 5 or 6 areas of services plus products plus information that came out of that investigation. And for the first time, we felt that we really did have some excitement to what we were doing and going to China. The great thing about Boddington's setup is he'd already met these people. He was setting up the meetings for us. So that what we were going to do, when we reached China, we hit the ground running and went straight into these meetings. So just a little bit of quick background. The city of Luan is approximately 1,000 kilometres south of Beijing. Took Darren and I, it took us 4 hours in a fast train, didn't it? And so, who wants to fly? Anyway, so that's 660,000 people in that prefecture, but there's 5.8 million people that's a 5-tier city. It's dissected by national highways, and this was probably the key thing that gave us some hope that we were going to perhaps push on with this city when we visited. Dissected by national highways and rail networks, is a major transport and logistics hub, services 60 million people within 200 kilometres, and services 115 million within a 300 kilometre radius. So there we have the highways, the railways, and the population. There was 3 notable large businesses that we visited. The Keppel cold chain store, the cold chain store owned by Keppel is a huge logistics company based in Singapore. They were just starting building that. That was 200 million. The food park was 320 million Aussie. And there was a joint venture with a German company in manufacturing helicopter engines. Baotao in Inner Mongolia is the largest industrial city in the Inner Mongolian region of northern China. A prefecture-level city, 5 urban districts, populations approximately 2.65 million. China produces 95% of the world's rare earth minerals, and 60% of that, 95%, comes from the city of Baotao. Just a little note, the smartphone that you've all got in your pocket has 8 different rare earth minerals in it. So we're dealing with a city cashed up. The inhabitants of Mongolia, I mean, it's in the back of hell, but when you get there, it is magnificent. So now just see what we're doing. Yep, okay. So just to quickly run through, what happened in the market and only a quick appraisal of, what we're on. The main thing that we had to work on now is that we went back last year for 2 missions. So we went back in March and we went back in October. So both of these cities knew that we were ready to do business because, I've said it for a long time, the Chinese have been ready to do business for 500 years with us, but it's taken us a while to get our point of sale material, etc. ready. But we let them know we were really there to do business. This shot I've got resonates with one of the companies that were travelling with us the last time before last and are now doing some work in China. So we'll have another one. So this lady is the biggest producer of Chinese medicine, and this is just one of her greenhouses, and the next one is interesting. So this is the first effort of a Mount Gambier-based company, and you may or may not know them. They're an offspring of the Holofresh group out at Tantanoola. And they have been awarded a contract to build their moving gully system in Hefei, which is 40 minutes from where we saw the other ones. And unfortunately, Christmas time, as you can see, work ground to a halt. But Mark and Greg are back there. I've got a WeChat from them today. And I reckon about 3 weeks' time, they'll have it ready. As you can see, the white that's a glass house. The white in there is actually 10 containers of product that was prepared here in Mount Gambier and shifted over. So we've established a sound working relationship with Keppel, which is the logistics company, and they've offered to act as our agent and broker for Limestone Coast businesses into that major distribution centre. As I said, the Mount Gambier-based Grow Systems Australia is now installing its first moving gully system into an agricultural demonstration park when the snow goes, and that's a $1.2 million manufacture there. And talking earlier about skills, talking about TAFE. We had one of the major dairies that we went out of our way to make sure we met, and they were just falling all over us saying we need some help with our training of our staff, and I'd sent them over a year ago some work that the dairy course does here in Mount Gambier, and they just loved what they saw. So really, here's the message. If South Australia doesn't want TAFE, we'll shift it to Luan. In Baotao, the emphasis there is on the delivery of services. As you notice, we've moved more into the delivery of services now on our missions into China, because we're good at what we do in this region, extra good. We've got the best genetics in the world in sheep, and we've got some of the best practices in the world in agriculture. So, and the other thing is that's playing right into our hands is that all the move is on to the big cities. The regional and provincial areas are just getting somewhat forgotten. Like the sheep in Mongolia just would shake your head, and it's got some genetic value there, but we can just make such a difference. So we can lift their economic performance, and that really is one of the reasons they keep talking to us. So what we're going to do with Baotao, we're at the stage now where we're moving towards an agreement from the government there to establish a flock improvement program, and that will be mainly done through embryo transfer, shipped out of Melbourne. Dr. Earl, that was with me for that, he sent 1,000 embryos to China, not to Baotao, but on another deal we've done in the last 2 weeks. We've had engagement with 2 meat importers that Keith-based Bullies Meat dispatched their first container, and also very strong engagement on education, because Tennyson Woods College has already some Baotao students, and during the Chinese New Year, I think there were 3 delegations of teachers, students, parents that were here, so it was quite busy. So what's actually the model that we've presented now, and it's working. Even Graham Greenwood in his piece, and Graham's a pretty good judge, he indicated that obviously Mount Gambier is doing the heavy lifting. So what we're saying is that the City Mount Gambier is the executive support for all these missions. And what we do is we cherry pick through the region, close liaison with fellow councils, working through the Limestone Coast Local Government Association. They know all about what we're doing and what we want. And so that's the model that we've got, and that's the model that I think will work. Now, just a quick one, I don't know how I'm going for time, John. But anyway, I better touch on this other one, the investment traction portfolio that really has got hard. Why has it got hard? Because it's so expensive to do business in South Australia. So when I kicked off in this role, we had some great success, Sarah, and probably a couple of quotes or a couple of paragraphs that I sort of look at every now and then. The ANZ Bank predictor for Australia stands to capture an additional $1.7 trillion in agricultural exports between now and 2050, and that a further 600 billion will be needed to enable this production of growth. So therefore, we're not saying foreign direct investment, but we're saying foreign investment is the only way that this can happen. And the second one is setting up in Australia can provide complementary market access to international companies to ensure that Asian businesses seeking safe, smart and sustainable production can leverage Australia and our reputation for quality as a base to export into their markets. So what we're really saying, we've got a great example. The reality is this is happening. So the new milk processing plant established out on the Penola Road, the Union Dairy Company, is a partnership between the Australian company, which is Midfield Group in Warrnambool, and Louis Dreyfus Company in Singapore. So what they do is they export into Asia. Great model. Nobody's buying one another out, but it's working. The other one, of course, when I acknowledged Sarah, we worked with Sarah to get this going. This is the Blue Lake Dairy Company, located at Tantanoola. Completed stage 1, and I'm sure Sarah won't mind me saying this, when stage 2 is ready to go, what a wonderful opportunity for investors. So that's the sort of hardware. This is the sort of infrastructure that I work on in attracting investment. But the other area that I think that I promised Julia I'd tell the story is the figures that are showing up now, and these figures come out of the Australia-China Business Council in Adelaide, is the number of business migrants that are coming into South Australia each year. So from the next 3 years to 2020, they're tipping that'll be about 1,500 business migrants that'll be worth, say, $2 million each. So there's $3 billion that is going to be at the disposal of somebody to what can we say, give them a hand and introduce them to the products they want. So we're already seeing benefits out of that, because I know that Darren Turner is going to speak to you in a minute, and he may or may not mention this, but we've had a great result with one of these companies that have taken close to $1 million, Darren, out of Darren's factory into his customers in China. So this quick story, if I've got the time. I had a call from the Department of State Development, Immigration SA, and what we were talking about a minute ago, they said, look, we've got some high net worth individuals that have got a lot of money to invest and are already doing quite a lot of work in the city, and they don't really know much about your region. So they had the funds, we didn't spend any money, and they said, we'd like to do what we call an investment showcase throughout the region. So they flew down here, I gave them a quick run around for a day, we had a look at some sites, we had a look at some opportunities, and they were happy, so away we went. We provided them with some suitable IMs, information memorandums, on these possible investments, and they sent out, I think, 15 or 20 invitation letters. They had responses back from 8, and they agreed that they'd bring 8 to the Limestone Coast, and a commercial lawyer. So the 8 of them flew down, and they were going to be looking for 2 days, and there were 2 categories that we actually selected. The first one is tourist accommodation and property development. We had 4 sites to look at. And the second one was, and they ranged in Mt Gambier, Coonawarra and Robe. And the second one was food and agribusiness, or agriculture I should say, had 3 sites. That was Coonawarra North and 2 in Robe. So the extra sweetener, if you like, was that we agreed, because it was going to be a joint arrangement between our region and Immigration SA and Tourism SA, that we would try and give them at least 4 what we would call regional experiences. And we were just saying earlier, you know, a regional experience differs right across the board. You know, it could mean having a great night out with food and wines, etc., or it could mean driving in and pulling up at Piccaninny Ponds and throwing a pebble in and watching the wave. Now, that's not really I wouldn't call that an experience, but when you see some of this stuff, yeah, we want them to come here. This is probably the greatest pamphlet I've ever carried. It just tells you everything. Go to Melbourne, drive back, all the students' parents are doing it. But what we've got to make sure is that when we get them here, we give them an experience. So we had 4 experiences that we considered would give these high net worth clients a bit of a touch-up. So the first one, they flew down here and they were collected at the Mt Gambier Airport by a fleet of Mercedes, courtesy of Gazards, and ferried to the barn here. In the piano bar at the barn, they met with some of the people that they were going to be introduced to at sites. And entertainment was provided by the master, James Morrison, and needless to say that dinner was the barn's best steak. So we got off the first day to a pretty good sort of event, and they all went to bed happy. Very late though. In Robe, we met at the Caledonian Hotel by the Mayor, and he gave them a welcome, and as you know now, Robe is starting to really hit its straps in its history, etc. So they were very taken with that. Afterwards, over at Gather Food and Wine restaurant, where we were treated to a 6-course meal of local produce, and the chef walked them through every course. Once again, very, very pleased with it. The third site, the following morning, a farm breakfast was hosted by a Chinese couple, Lillian Dong, of Lakeside Cimental Stud. Lillian Dong have also got a beautiful property back in Mongolia. They presented a session on why they chose to invest in regional South Australia rather than a CBD investment, and adding to their experiences as exporters of high quality Cimental genetics back to their stud in Inner Mongolia. And of course, the fourth one we just couldn't miss. Lunch at the tasting room at Mayora Station and the paddock to plate experience. So we put them on the plane. They all had, don't know how much Wagyu, but anyway, we got it in there. And I think it might have been a cray or 2 getting sneaked in, but anyway, they had a great time. So just have a quick look at the results afterwards of these 8 people that came down here, and I've seen most of them, a fair bit since. A quick look. Number 1, the high net worth individual property developer is a partner in the West Franklin Apartments in Adelaide. The site is a $300 million build. The second guy, high net worth individual, built the 18-storey Vision on Morphett. He's not broke. A third person made an offer through his commercial lawyer on one of the sites we visited of 1.4 million, and that was a tourist development site. Nothing happened. The Malaysian agent, who, Michael, I've got to know him very well, I've met with 3 or 4 times in Adelaide. When I saw him about 4 weeks ago, he took 7 Malaysian investors to a beachfront development 2 hours north of Adelaide. They were given a beautiful beach lunch of fresh seafood. It didn't say anything about wine, but they all signed their contracts after lunch. So that was 7 of them that bought them. So I can announce this evening that I intend doing this same initiative in June this year. Thank you.